Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. Welcome to our summer orientation webinar series. My name is Lincoln Till, and I am the Assistant Director for Orientation in the College Programming and Orientation Office. And today I will be moderating this webinar. Today's webinar will be an introduction to the college core curriculum here at UChicago and will be presented by our College Academic Advising Office, as well as some of our featured faculty. And we will review the core curriculum and all that it provides for students and how it's a challenging academic foundation before the course for their specific field of study and everything that that means. Today's webinar will include a presentation and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end of that. So feel free, there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to put any questions that you have there and we will do our best to answer as many questions as we can when we get to the Q&A portion later. And with that, I will pass it over to Steph Matos, the Assistant Dean and Assistant Director in the College Advising and Academic Advising Office.
Thank you so much, Lincoln. Welcome, everyone. We're so glad you're able to join us today in anticipation of the beginning of your UChicago journey. Today's presentation aims to provide an introduction to the distinctive liberal arts education that UChicago offers. This is the first of several webinars from our College Academic Advising Office this summer. As Lincoln said, I'm the Assistant Dean and Assistant Director of our office, and I'm joined by two of my department colleagues in hosting the webinar today, Elise LaRose, Academic Advisor, and Will Rawl, Senior Academic Advisor, who you'll get to hear from shortly. This presentation will also feature 4 esteemed faculty members with deep connections to the core curriculum, who will offer a conceptual understanding of core and their insights of what makes the UChicago core so unique. Jennifer Spruill, Eric Slauter, Daragh Grant, and Abby Reardon. We will first hear from Jennifer Spruill, Senior Associate Instructional Professor in Social Science Core Sequence Co-Chair for Power, Identity, and Resistance, followed by a detailed curricular overview of the core components with academic advisors Elise and Will. Next, Professors Eric Slauter, Master of the Arts and Humanities Collegiate Division, and Daragh Grant, an Associate Senior Lecturer and Social Science Core Sequence Co-Chair for Classics of Social and Political Thought, will expound on the habits of mind developed in the humanities and the social science core sequences. Finally, Abby Reardon, the Executive Director of the Writing Program, will highlight exciting changes to the writing requirement in core and the new opportunities it'll present to students. During the presentation, I will moderate the chat function to aggregate the response and respond to your questions. At the end of the webinar, we will have reserved time to respond out loud to your most common questions. We ask that you do keep your questions to the topic of the webinar. If you have other questions you would like to ask the Academic Advising Office, we ask you to please email collegeadvising@uchicago.edu following the presentation. If time remains at the end, we will invite other questions at that time, but otherwise, please email our office with any inquiries you have. Last, before getting started, I'd like to share our goals for our time together today, which are to observe the distinct features of a UChicago liberal arts education, to begin to identify the values and goals inspiring the different core sequences, to recognize the different fields of study among the core requirements, to consider how studying different modes of thought will prepare you to engage critically and creatively, and to become familiar with the 2 options for the core writing requirement. And now I'll turn it over to Elise LaRose.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Steph. Again, also let me say how delighted I am that all of you have joined us today. We know that many of you chose the University of Chicago for our unique liberal arts curricular experience, a curriculum that goes well beyond mere distribution requirements. As an alumna of the University of Chicago for my graduate studies and academic advisor in the college for more than 20 years, I'm genuinely passionate about our general education curriculum known as the core. Shortly, we will review each requirement, but to start us off, I'd like to also welcome Jennifer Spruill, Associate Senior Instructional Professor in the college. Jennifer earned her law degree and her PhD in anthropology at the University of Chicago, Having taught in the core for many years, she also serves as a senior advisor on the core and co-chairs one of our social science sequences, about which you'll hear a little bit more in a bit. That sequence that she teaches in is Power, Identity, and Resistance. Students can take many different courses here, and I'm going to let Jen now take it away.
Thank you, Elise. Hello, everyone. Again, welcome to the University of Chicago and to its unique core curriculum. I imagine some of you are very familiar with the core and may have chosen UChicago because of it. Some of you might be hearing about the core for the first time in this meeting, and many of you are somewhere in between. I'll be talking about the core as a whole, that is, as a common academic program that enables students to explore complex ideas and processes. This is a chart of the different components of the core, and you will see this chart again many times, and you'll hear about the details from your advisors later. Overall, the core might seem like distribution requirements that you would find at any liberal arts college. It looks like we might want you to take a little art, science, literature, a little math, social science, to get a broad education across the disciplines and areas of study in order to develop broad-based knowledge. However, the core is not a distributional model, and it really aims at other priorities. First, the core aims at developing scholarly practices and habits of mind, like critical thinking, interpretation, argumentation, and oral and written communication, as explicit and integral elements of the core's specific pedagogy, not as incidental or accidental to discipline-based classes in a distributional model. Here you can see Catherine is working on her argument for her Hume core paper. And I'll say that most of the photos that I'm showing you today are student submissions to our core photo contest this year, which you can enter next year. So inquiry then, and this is a power identity resistance classroom. So inquiry then is the core's fundamental orientation. In your college search, you might have heard other liberal arts colleges say that they teach how to think, not what to think. This is what we mean at UChicago when we say that. The core is not about teaching the canon. It's not a great books course. It's not about imparting specific content. Instead, the core asks, how do we pose questions from different perspectives? What knowledge and skills are needed to respond to these questions? What methods and reasoning does their analysis call for? And how do we respond to these questions in convincing ways using evidence and argument? We can see this if we think about a single object. This plate will be featured in an exhibit at the Smart Museum on campus next year, which will be based on my sequence, Power, Identity, Resistance. The plate portrays trade relations between England and China in the 18th century. We included it in the exhibition because it's a great opportunity for us to think, for example, about Adam Smith's critique of mercantilism, his argument about how merchants are ill-suited to sovereign rule. It's also a chance for us to talk about the class structure reflected in the family's social status and affiliations. On the other hand, an economist might inquire about the particularities of the economic relations portrayed here and examine specific data about the production and exchange of silk, porcelain, and tea. A chemist might ask about the materials like kaolinite and the processes like vitrification through which the porcelain was produced and the enamel applied. An art historian might think about the decorative elements and artistic representations and ask, for example, about the decorator's choice to portray Chinese sailing vessels on the Thames. Fundamentally, the core begins with the idea that knowledge is produced. It's not objectively sitting in the world for us to discover. So in your core classes, you'll locate ideas historically and socially, and you'll explore how we produce knowledge through the questions we ask, the methods and evidence we use to answer them, the fields of study we draw on, and the audiences to which we address ourselves. For example, the inquiry biology core fundamentally asks, what is the biological basis of behavior? Classes take place in the lab, integrating lectures, discussions, and experiments in active learning, which eliminates the separation between theory and practice. Students conduct their own research projects to experience how biologists frame questions and test hypotheses. Each course instructor focuses their section on a different major problem in the biological sciences that will frame the students' research questions, like how do genes, nervous systems, and environments affect behavior? In the Soc core, some of our basic questions include why and how do people form communities, and how do we study them? How does political society organize our economic lives, and vice versa? And how, as individuals, do we navigate society? Jesselyn was thinking about questions like these when she took the train downtown, and noted that her Soc core prompted her to realize that questions like these are not as straightforward as we might initially think. And they become especially interesting as we look at 21st century ways of living and forming society. In my own sections in Power Identity Resistance, we work toward a quarter-long project in the spring where students use our texts to analyze a question that they develop. In the Humanities core, Cecile documents how her poetry in the Human course visited the Special Collections Research Center to see Homeric papyri fragments that date to the 2nd century. With no prior information about the objects available, they were asked to choose one to examine and analyze in relation to their course, and Cecile chose this one from the Iliad. You can see that core classes introduce scholarship as interpretive critical endeavor, which produces new understandings and capacities through active engagement, which opens new perspectives. So what is the value of all of this to you? First, it means you have some really interesting classes to take. The core will also prepare you for your work in your major, but probably not in the way that you think. The core supports your work in the majors, not by providing a disciplinary introduction. Now, there are a couple exceptions to that your advisors will talk about, but for the most part, the core supports your work in the majors, not by providing a disciplinary introduction, but by developing practices of scholarship through multidisciplinary courses. And these are generally taught by multidisciplinary teaching staffs. For example, in Power, we have a wide range of instructors, including anthropologists, historians, sociologists, philosophers, political scientists, and we meet weekly to discuss our different approaches to the syllabus and our texts so that both we and our students benefit from this. In the core, we encourage you to explore ideas outside your intended major. The core will allow you to explore a range of interests and possibly change or add a major or a minor. And you might discover interests that you weren't aware of. It is not rare that students hold off on their arts core until their 4th year, and then they wish they had taken it earlier. So don't hold off on your arts core. Core study will deepen and broaden your work in your major. You'll discover how different areas of thought and study are related to each other, often in a single class, like the Chemistry of Artist Materials course. So the core classes are not aimed at particular majors. The social sciences sequence called Mind is not intended for psych majors. Instead, psych majors might consider, for example, taking an interpretive sequence like Power or Classics that would allow them to think about the formation of social and political communities in which individuals are located. If you're interested in political theory, you might take a sequence that will expose you to quantitative social analysis. In your core study, you'll discover how different areas of thought are related to each other. For example, someone interested in finance who takes energy and world civilizations will find ways that environmental policy relates to their future work. And indeed, this broader perspective will help you in your future work. Anyone at Career Services will tell you that UChicago students are more competitive on the job market exactly because of the skills they develop in the core. And interestingly, alumni of the college consistently report that they realize how valuable their core experiences was not right after they finished college, but as they start advancing in their career and begin using the full range of the skills that they acquired in their core classes. So I invite you to really embrace the opportunity that the core presents, explore your interests, gain new experiences, and reach beyond what you think that you'll major in. And I just want to note that I'll need to leave this meeting early to go teach one of the social sciences core in the summer session. So I won't be here for questions, but I am happy to hear from any of you on email.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jen, for that rich overview. So now we're going to take a look at the details of the core itself. The core curriculum requires, we'll say for now, 16 courses across 9 fields, and also includes the language competency expectation. These 16 courses each earn you 100 units of credit for 1,600 units. Some students may have AP or IB credits that they bring to us that will meet some of the math and science requirements, possibly language requirements. Others may take more advanced exams, but overall, most students are completing a total of 16 requirements. All students complete 1 to 2 arts courses, 2 or 3 humanities in the same sequence, 2 or 3 civilization studies in the same sequence, potentially 1 or 2 writing courses. Everybody's completing at least 1. 3 social sciences, 1 or 2 math, 2 or 3 physical sciences, 2 or 3 biological sciences, and the variation in math, physical sciences, and biological sciences reflects which majors you might be preparing for. And then again, as mentioned a bit ago, some students are starting an entirely new language and maybe taking 3 courses in language or more, depending on what they want to do with their language studies. So again, this totals 1,600 units or 16 courses. And when you meet individually with your advisors, we'll have a chance to look into each of these in depth as you would like your needs and educational desires met. So now we're going to look again at each of these requirements, although Jen offered us a very thorough overview.
So we'll begin with the language competency requirement. Here at UChicago, we think it's critical that all students possess the language skills to engage with and appreciate the cultures and worlds that exist beyond our own. This might mean that you have the opportunity to deepen your own academic studies, as well as also build relationships with the folks in the communities around you. So how exactly do you demonstrate language competency? The baseline is we hope that each student will possess the skills and competencies imparted over the course of 1 entire year of academic study of a language. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone needs to take an entire year or 3 courses of language study. Many of you will come in with qualifying AP scores or IB scores. That will mean that you don't have to take any language. Some of you come in with the ambitions of wanting to start a completely new language. Maybe you studied French in high school and want to pick up German. Well, then you can start at the beginning and work your way up. Others will have taken some language and have some competencies, but won't quite meet the language expectation here. That's why we encourage every student to take the language placement exam, which perhaps the deadline has passed, but the language placement exam would stay open for you throughout your entire time here at UChicago, actually. Take the language placement test, see where you land, and with that placement, you'll learn better about where you'll stand and what courses you need to take in order to satisfy your language requirement. Each case is going to be a little bit different and a little bit unique. So as you have questions, if you think that your situation might not fall into one that are laid out here, then please speak with your academic advisor to better understand what exactly you need to do to satisfy the language competency requirement. Next, everyone has to satisfy some sort of mathematical competencies. You might want to learn about the very foundations of mathematics themselves and the proofs that actually explain them. Or you might be just looking for introductory analytical skills to help interpret your research data. We're going to have any number of different places for you to start and any number of different ways to round out your liberal arts education here. Everyone coming into UChicago is required to take the math placement test. You need a math placement in order to be eligible to register for a math course. So please, if you haven't already, take the math placement exam. And then once you take the exam and get results back, you can then work with your academic advisor to find out which math path is going to be best for you. Everyone is required to take at least one class, but a very common path would be to pursue calculus, which is a requisite 2 classes. You need to demonstrate that you have the competencies of 2 quarters of calculus. Some majors require that you satisfy your math core curriculum requirements in a particular way. The physical science class or physical science majors, of course, math, and some maybe that you wouldn't expect. Something like public policy requires that you have competencies in calculus in order to pursue that major. So again, as you have questions about how exactly to satisfy your math requirement, please speak with your academic advisor. Elise?
All right, so now we'll talk just a little bit more about the physical sciences requirements. The physical sciences core requirement endeavors to provide students with an opportunity to explore and expand their understanding of the physical world. Perhaps that's obvious, but we take that seriously here. For students interested in fields like chemistry, physics, biology, math, computer science, or environmental science, or for those who are considering a pre-health career preparation, most of you are going to begin with what we think of as traditional chemistry and traditional physics. Then students who enjoyed these subjects in high school or who took the AP in physics or chem may be taking the credit they earned from AP or IB and using those credits toward the core. Students who are not interested in going on in a STEM field will probably be opting to take one of these sequences that faculty have designed just for the core curriculum. So the assumption here, and this is also true of biology, which we'll get to shortly, is that all people are curious about the physical and natural world and should be well educated, even if you are not preparing to become a mathematician, scientist, or computer scientist. So courses in these sequences designed just for the core non-science majors have titles like Physics for Future Presidents, Stars, Black Holes, the Chemistry of Food and Cooking, and Global Warming. Again, to recap, all students fulfill a minimum of 2 physical sciences in the core. Now, for the biological sciences, again, everybody is fulfilling a minimum of 2 courses. If you are preparing for a health career, or if you are preparing for, say, a neuroscience major or a biological sciences major, possibly a biological chemistry major or an environmental science major, you're going to take what we think of as traditional courses that biologists take. And one-on-one, when you meet with your advisor, we'll get into the details of which courses those should be. If, however, you are taking your biology courses to fulfill our expectation, but you are not preparing for pre-health professions or a science major, then you are likely starting with the inquiry-based biology course that Professor Spruill referenced a bit ago. And then as your second biology, you'll be taking a topical course of choice, again, for the non-scientist. These combinations do involve laboratory work and experimentation, but do not offer quite as comprehensive an expectation in the laboratory as those taking a more traditional biology, physics, or chemistry for the sciences.
So now that we've covered the STEM fields, students are also required to take at least one arts class. This is your opportunity to engage with the worlds of visual arts, of creative writing, design, art history, music, drama, film, and to think about, understand, and analyze, ultimately really appreciating art and its meaning. These courses might engage you in poetry writing or photography, or you might even journey down to the Art Institute to look at and examine modern masterpieces in person. As I mentioned, everyone is required to take at least one core arts class. Very oftentimes, students will take two. And while we have a very wide-ranging selection of core arts classes, there are some specific ones that are reserved for the core curriculum. So I'll just say, once again, please make sure that you coordinate with your academic advisor as you explore the arts, making sure that perhaps begin with things in the core arts and then let that whet your appetite as you explore beyond the core curriculum. Next, we have civilization studies, or more colloquially known as Civ. And this will be your introduction to the production of history and an analysis of how and why things have changed over time. In these courses, you will learn not only about historical narratives and the people and events that populate them, but also the processes of marshaling evidence, of analyzing texts, building arguments, and making claims about the past. Each student at the University of Chicago must take 2 courses in one of our many different Civ sequences that focus on everything from ancient Mediterranean world to African civilization to European history to energy in world civilizations. Several different sequences that are organized chronologically, organized thematically, and lots of different opportunities to explore history as you'd like. As I mentioned, everyone is required to take 2 courses in one Civ sequence. You can take a third course in a Civ sequence if you want to. And very oftentimes, this is an opportunity that students like to take advantage of study abroad. UChicago offers several different study abroad opportunities to go, say, take your Civ sequence in Paris, to go to places like Oaxaca, or places like Morocco. You can learn about the history of these places while experiencing the people and the artifacts at the same time. So this is the kinds of themes and topics that you'll be exploring over the course of your Civ sequence.
All right, so now we're going to talk just a little bit about social sequences, but you're going to hear more from Professor Grant in a little bit about this. We offer 8 different social sequences. And everybody completes a full year of social, so 3/4 of the same sequence. Just as a reminder from what Professor Spruill explained at the beginning, social science sequences, or known as SOC here, teach students a critical vocabulary to ask foundational questions such as, what is society? What is a community? How does a person develop in relation to others within the dynamics of a society and its culture? What role do culture, gender, the economy, and work life play in the development of persons? Some sequences focus on classic texts like those of John Locke, Karl Marx, Frantz Fanon, and Simone de Beauvoir, while others focus on different aspects of social science inquiry. All sequences explore how the social sciences formulate questions and examine the nature of social life. So you've heard a few titles already from Professor Spruill: Power, Identity, Resistance, Self, Culture, and Society, Classics in Social and Political Thought. Then we have sequences such as Mind, Social Science Inquiry, Global Society, and others. And then allow me to speak briefly about the humanities. Shortly, you're going to be hearing from Professor Slauter about this aspect of the core, which all of you will be taking as first years this year. At first blush, you might think that the humanities is simply like what you've probably experienced as an English literature course. And certainly it will incorporate literature. But these courses, like everything else in the core, are organized around themes and driven by various questions that the faculty who think together about these sequences lead you through. So, taken in the first year, as I've said, the objectives of the humanities core are to provide a bridge between high school and college, but they go far beyond that. And they're teaching you to think about how we engage with texts, what does it mean ultimately to read closely, and how might you begin to develop what we think of as a capacity for interpretive complexity. And with that, I'm going to turn it now over to Professor Eric Slauter, who serves as our collegiate master in the arts and humanities and is a deputy dean for the arts and humanities here at the university at large.
Will, I'm unable to get my video to come on.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's see.
Thanks.
There it is.
Well, hello everyone, and sorry for that technical glitch. I'm Eric Slauter. I'm extremely excited to get a chance to talk with you. I am a deputy dean and have an administrative role helping oversee our arts and humanities education at the undergraduate level, which means I'll be very excited to welcome all of you into your humanities core classes in the autumn. But I'm also an instructor here, and I will be teaching in the humanities core in the fall. And so I'm especially excited to get a chance to work with 19 of you in the fall. But welcome to everyone. It is really just an honor to get this chance to talk with you about what we think of as a very special kind of course. We treat the humanities core as a foundational experience here. It is the one course that we prioritize for all first-year students, all new students into the college, including all or most second-year transfer students. And we do that for a couple of reasons. I'm going to try to walk you through some of them. But I want to say first that the arts and the humanities here at Chicago are really thriving. Many of you, I expect, are perhaps more interested in quantitative than qualitative explanations, but let me just tell you by the numbers. We have 440 faculty and instructors in the Arts and Humanities division. This is a recently renamed division, one of the four. That's 10% larger than any other of our peer campuses. So we have more faculty. We also have more faculty in part because we have a much higher student demand for our courses. We have just a lot of students interested in not just the humanities core, which obviously is something that you're going to choose to do in the first year, but in our advanced courses too. So last year, just to go by the numbers, 26,000 students enrolled, or we had 26,000 separate enrollments in arts and humanities classes, which meant that the arts and the humanities division was at the top of the list, above the biological sciences, physical sciences, and social sciences. And part of that is, as you've seen from the core grid, that you're going to get the opportunity to take courses in the arts core, the humanities core, in languages. Some of the civilization tracks are also staffed by instructors and faculty in the humanities. For the last 15 years, 1/3 of all undergraduates have majored or minored in the humanities, which is, I believe, probably at the very top of national rankings. I will just say, our most recent national fellowship winners, or 4 of our 5 most recent national fellowship winners, that includes a Rhodes Scholar, 2 Gates Scholars, and a Marshall Scholar, all pursued some kind of degree within the humanities, often pairing it with a degree outside of the humanities, say law, letters, and society, and Spanish, or economics and fundamentals, or something like that. So what exactly are you going to do in your humanities core classes, and what do humanists do here at the university? I think the easy way to understand it is that, we're a big group, but we study the past, we try to describe the present, and we try to help people imagine the future. I think, and I obviously can't speak for 440 people, but I think we as a division believe very strongly that many of today's very big problems have a kind of inherent humanistic dimension to them. So, for instance, we think that it's impossible to think about something like AI, artificial intelligence, without really critically thinking about what intelligence is, what cognition means, and even what artifice is. We think that issues within climate and energy that I know so many of you are interested in are not just going to have scientific solutions, but require changes in attitudes, beliefs, understandings, and so forth. It's, I think, easy to say that global political, economic, and social issues of the day are ones that really command and require a certain kind of fluency in languages, in cultures, and in the traditions of others in order to be addressed. So the faculty that I represent and that will be in your classrooms comes from a wide array of disciplines in the arts and the humanities. It includes philosophers, it includes computational linguists, it includes just an enormous number of experts on individual and comparative languages, literatures, histories, cultures, and the civilizations of the world. It includes art historians, film scholars, ethnomusicologists, media theorists, and then a whole slew of arts practitioners as well. So painters and sculptors and photographers in our Department of Visual Arts, composers and performers in the Department of Music, choreographers, dancers, and directors in our Theater and Performance Studies program, novelists, poets, and nonfiction writers in creative writing, filmmakers in cinema and media studies, and video game makers in media arts and digital design. And so Humanities Core is really the gateway to all of this activity. We have something like 26 majors and 26 minors. Our top major right now is philosophy, but you can take deep dives into almost any part of the world's history and into almost over 50 languages, and any of those arts practice disciplines. You also have the opportunity when you're at Chicago to take courses in sort of only at Chicago programs like our fundamentals major, where students are encouraged to come up with an individual question and organize their studies around it. Or our cognitive science program, which is a college-only program anchored in the humanities, where students will be taking courses in linguistics and in philosophy alongside courses in every other division. So courses in psychology and the social sciences, in computer science, in physical sciences, and in neuroscience, in the biological sciences. So it really, I think of the humanities core as the gateway to that. But even for those of you who, let's say, wish only to take the humanities core, you're going to get an enormous amount out of it, even if that's the only time you end up spending with us. The things that you're going to learn how to do or be retrained how to do involve being able to read closely, to reconstruct another person's argument, to be able to ask difficult questions and to evaluate evidence with a certain degree of critical acumen, to respectfully listen to what others have to say, to practice a kind of open-mindedness in the classroom, and to learn to express yourself not just freely, which is very on brand for us, but also well. And so let me tell you a little bit about the nuts and bolts of these courses, which are capped at 19. So there are intimate courses, and in many cases might be some of the most intimate courses that you take in your first year at the university. That's not always the way we've approached this, and that's certainly not the way that other schools are approaching it. So in the past, we used to assemble all of our first year students into one lecture hall. You'll come to know it as Mandel Hall over in the Reynolds Club. It would no longer seat our entire first year class, but we would put them all in that class 3 times a week, and then a rotating series of experts would come and lecture at them, and you would get a sense of the sort of unfurling of different civilizations and different texts. But since the 1930s, we've decided to do this in a completely different way. Everything is discussion-based in those smaller units. And we do that not because we don't prize expertise, absolutely. But we also feel that the lecture method is just not the right method to develop the kinds of habits of mind that we want you to achieve when you come to the University of Chicago. So we want you to be able to, after you've taken your philosophical perspectives class, not to necessarily know the most recent and critical scholarship on, say, Plato, but to learn how to ask a question like a philosopher, or how to reconstruct an argument the way a philosopher might. How does that habit of mind influence how you are going to behave in other areas of your life, or how to look at an artwork with the eye of an art historian or an artist, or how to listen to a text, a poem, or a novel with the kind of ear of a literary critic or a poet or novelist, and of course, above all, how to write. As Jennifer was saying, a lot of places are now embracing the idea that they will teach you not what to think, but how to think. And that really has been the method here at the university for a very, very long time. You will have experts at the front of your room, of course, but they are there to help facilitate the conversation, not necessarily to answer every single factual question or interpretive question, but to get you to figure out what the questions are that you want to ask of those texts, and to learn how to engage in this very special kind of intellectual community. So I've mentioned these texts, but I haven't mentioned what they will be, in part because, as Jennifer was also saying, they're somewhat secondary. So alumni routinely remember with great specificity not only what they read, but how they read it, what an instructor might have said, what their classmates might have said, what kind of paper they wrote about it. I know that because sitting at this desk, I get emails from alumni, most recently one who graduated in the early 1970s and was just hoping I could put my hands on the syllabus he had used in the late 1960s. He had now that he was retired from a financial firm, he wanted to just reread everything, and he remembered quite a lot of the text. So it was fun to sort of look and see that. I can say that these texts encompass more or less the last 5,000 years, and they are global, from works that were originally made on clay tablets or papyrus scrolls to born digital formats, and they were made around the world. But as I said, the books are to some degree a kind of secondary occasion for the classes. They're not great books classes. They're not even great snippets classes, as some of our courses in the 1950s tended to be. We don't really have what we think of as a unitary core, the way some universities do. Most famously, Columbia has a core where, everyone is reading exactly the same thing at exactly the same time, from the Iliad at the beginning of the fall to a work by Toni Morrison at the end of the spring. In fact, at any one moment, students in our course sequences are reading 8 different things. So just to take a kind of dipstick at one particular moment, or a survey at one particular moment. If we think about what students are reading in, say, week 4 of the humanities core in the winter, when it is maybe a little cold and a little bleak outside, what are students snuggling up with? Well, students in our media aesthetics class are reading Plato's Phaedrus and thinking about the problems of writing and speaking. Students in Human Being and Citizen are reading Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics and thinking about friendship, and transitioning to Augustine's Confessions and thinking about the origins of autobiography. In philosophical perspectives, they're thinking about and with René Descartes and his discourse on method. In Greece and Rome, after having dealt with a number of classical tragedies, they're in the Renaissance, thinking with Shakespeare's Hamlet. In our course sequence called Reading Cultures, students are transitioning from Homer's Odyssey to Harriet Jacobs' 19th century autobiography, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. In Readings in World Literature, they're reading a work by Shei Shonagon, who was a court lady to a Japanese empress around the year 1000, called The Pillow Book. In Poetry and the Human, students are engaging with contemporary poetry from the Middle East. And in Language and the Human, they're discussing issues of linguistic identity, bilingualism, and reading the autobiography of Richard Rodriguez called Hunger of Memory. I want to tell you a little bit more about a few of these sequences, just to kind of whet your appetite, some of the themes and topics that you might address. So Human Being and Citizen looks at issues of justice, law, friendship, self, community, and what constitutes the good. Philosophical Perspectives offers not a history of philosophy, but a kind of deep account of ongoing arguments about the place of humans in the world over time, including connections to other disciplines like science, literature, religion, and law. Reading Cultures deals with issues of collection, travel, and exchange, with memory, home, and belonging, with politics and poetics of storytelling, with the legacies of colonialism, and the relation of economic development to cultural transformation. Readings in World Literature focuses on grand epic and also intimate personal autobiography. It explores ideas of cultural value and social hierarchy, of individuality, death, power, and sexuality. Greece and Rome, Text, Traditions, and Transformations, looks at the transformation and contestation of classical traditions of the epic, the tragic, and the comic over space and time from the classical world to the present. Poetry and the Human explores the role that poetry plays and has played in society, in particular in relationship to memory, to performance, to storytelling, to history, ritual, creation, and knowledge formation. Media aesthetics looks at images, text, sounds, and explores seeing, reading, listening, and the philosophical questions raised by trying to understand the effects of these media and the idea of representation more generally. And finally, language and the human is a blend of linguistics, philosophy, and perhaps neuroscience, looking at language in power, identity, and thought. How, for instance, does language influence how we think about race, gender, sexual orientation, and species? How does language motivate us to act? So those are some of the topics, but I think you can hear there's quite a lot of room within these courses to think through some very big questions about what it means to be human. So what is justice? What is creativity? How does language shape belief? How can we represent experience? What is interpretation? And how are different disciplines connected? All of these have a writing component, and Abby Reardon is with us today to talk you through some of that. I will just simply say that 7 of the 8 sequences this year will have writing seminars attached to them, and 1, Human Being and Citizen, will have a brand new course, the opportunity for students to explore a brand new course called Inquiry, Conversation, and Argument. Now, the core over the past few years has gone outside of the classroom in ways that Jennifer has already begun to suggest. Over at the Smart Museum, which we use as a classroom, students are studying artworks. At the Institute for the Study of Ancient Cultures, when students are reading Gilgamesh, they're over there looking at 3,500-year-old cuneiform tablets. They're visiting the Tony Award-winning Court Theater here on campus. 2 years ago, they saw Antigone. Last year, they saw, or this year, they saw Raisin in the Sun. And more students, as that student who submitted a photograph from Special Collections, are visiting the Hannah Holborn Gray Special Collections Research Center at Regenstein Library. And I can just kind of close by saying a little bit about that space, which is where I have been holding my core courses in Human Being and Citizen, which meant that students were not only engaging with the copies of the books that we were reading, they were also getting a sense of what and how these works had transformed over a very long period of time. So that meant that students who were reading the Iliad got to see a 2,000-year-old piece of papyrus, a fragment of the Iliad, but they also got to see the very first printed edition in the 1480s, done in Florence. So just a few decades after the famous Gutenberg Bible was printed in Germany. They were also able to see the first female translation of the Iliad made around the year 1700 and translated into French by Anne Dacier. 4 of the 18 students in my section were international students. The one who came to us from Spain was excited to see a Spanish translation of the Iliad from the 16th century. A student from Latvia who could read Russian was excited to see the Moscow 1776 edition of translation into Russian. A student from China was equally excited to see a 20th century translation of the book, of Homer's book into Chinese for the first time. Plus, the students got to see all sorts of other really wonderful things, posters from when Martin Luther King visited campus in the 1960s, a signed Emancipation Proclamation, original copies of the Declaration of Independence in newspapers from the 1770s. There's a lot to explore here. I will be teaching Human Being and Citizen in the fall, and along with the other autumn instructors and we are very excited to welcome you. So thank you.
Eric, thank you for that inspiring overview. I am now also pleased to reintroduce you to Associate Senior Instructional Professor in the Social Sciences Collegiate Division, Daragh Grant. He is co-chair for the Classics of Social and Political Thought, and he's going to tell us now a bit more about SocialCore.
Thanks, Elise. I don't know if my video is showing well. Is that up yet? It is? Okay. Hello, welcome to the University of Chicago. My name is Daragh Grant. I teach in Classics of Social and Political Thought, which is one of the SocialCore sequences. Begins with the study of social and political thought in ancient Athens and continues up to the 20th century. I'd like to begin by congratulating all of you on making a really fantastic decision about what to do with the next 4 years of your life. We're delighted to have you here at the University of Chicago, and we hope that you find in the core all of the rich resources that you've already heard about, but also an opportunity to think anew about many subjects, including about the society that you inhabit, that might seem already familiar to you, but that we're going to maybe make a little bit more unfamiliar, even a little bit strange over the next couple of years. So the task of teaching people the liberal arts might help us to begin with what indeed we think those liberal arts are. And at the University of Chicago, we think of them broadly as those habits of mind that are essential to living a full life as a citizen in a free society. And part of what the SocialCore aims to do is to add on to what you'll have learned in your humanities core and set some groundwork for work you'll do, whether in a social sciences major or really any major that you undertake in the college. So I'm going to begin with an account of some broad aims that the SocialCore has. I'll then give you a brief rundown of the sequences in the SocialCore, and then I'm going to return to those two broad aims to add a little more flesh to the bones. So there are essentially two core goals that any social sequence is going to have. And no matter what choice you make about social, or no matter what social you end up enrolled in, these are aims that are going to be fulfilled by the sequences that you take. So the first of those is affording you new resources, new tools, new analytical strategies for understanding the society of which you are a part. Coming to grips with how different ideas and different institutions have shaped your social world, and indeed your views about that social world. And also thinking about what possibilities exist maybe for thinking differently about the world that we share with one another, and what impediments might stand in the way of our pursuing those goals to which we aspire. But secondly, and more fundamentally, and you've heard a bunch about this today, so this is going to sound a little bit repetitive maybe, but I want you to sit nevertheless with the point that I'm trying to get across here, is we're going to be teaching you foundational skills, not only for studying the social sciences, but that will be essential to your success in any career in the college, whether you're a computer scientist or a biologist or an economist or a humanities major. So we're going to be building on what Eric has told you about developing capacities for critical reading skills by getting you to read closely, carefully, but also critically. And most importantly, with a certain kind of ethics of benevolent skepticism. So we want you to doubt the things that we're asking you to read, but we don't want you to be reacting to those things. We want you to be thinking about them, thinking about the best version of the argument you might be trying to wrestle with, and then trying to develop in your own, for yourself, a perspective on those texts, whether that's a perspective of agreement or a perspective of disagreement. Similarly, we want you to develop a set of habits for your writing and for developing your own intellectual perspective and your own analytical voice in the written word. And this is going to allow you to develop and convey your insights while keeping in mind the needs of the people reading what it is that you're writing. And by that, I don't mean, me as the person who's reading your paper for my class. I mean developing a set of habits about writing that will enable you in the future, no matter what field you enter, no matter what life course you pursue, to develop your own thoughts in your writing in such a way that you can have pretty solid expectation that an attentive reader will take you to be saying what you take yourself to be saying. And then perhaps most importantly, we're going to help you develop a set of skills for communicating in conversation with your peers, whether those conversations are ones of agreement or ones of disagreement. And essential to that task is learning how to listen, and indeed how to listen in a receptive way, where the generosity you show to your peers is the generosity of taking what they have to offer, of listening to what they're saying, taking them to be saying the best or strongest version of what they're saying, and then deciding whether or not you agree or disagree, or what the best way to engage the thoughts of others is. So taken together, those habits of reading, of writing, and of listening and speaking are going to be foundational to any task of critical thinking that you undertake at the University of Chicago. And again, the yield of the core here is not discipline specific. It really allows you to move into other fields and to express yourself confidently, but also in a manner that is accurate to what it is that you're trying to say. So I'll return to those goals in a minute and say a little bit more about them. But first, I want to give you an outline of how the Soc Core is structured. So as Elise mentioned earlier, there are 8 different sequences through which you can pursue the Soc Core, and they take, broadly speaking, one of 2 different approaches. There's one exception to that, which I'll come to at the end. So first, there are 5 options that are the more, what you might consider traditional or primary text-based approaches to the social sciences core. In all of these courses, your main mode of proceeding will be by reading foundational works in social and political thought from across a range of traditions. So the big 3 are the sort of 3 older sequences that meet that requirement are Self, Culture, and Society, Power, Identity, and Resistance, which Jennifer Spruill teaches in, and my sequence, Classics of Social and Political Thought. And alongside these, there are 2 newer sequences that are more thematic in focus. So the first is the Democracy Core, which studies the history and of both ideas and practices of democratic theory from the ancient world to the present. And the Religion Core, which studies the relationship between religion and society across a range of religious traditions. Now, that's the first broad approach, text-based approach to fulfilling your social core requirement. The second broad approach is more quantitative or data-focused. So the first sequence is social science inquiry, and that comes in a variety of flavors, and you should pay attention to the details of the catalog to see which of those sequences or flavors would best meet your needs. But broadly speaking, the goal of social science inquiry is to teach you how to gather, analyze, and interpret data relevant to contemporary public policy issues. So that's what that sequence will focus on. And then the Mind Core pursues, in some ways, from a different angle of approach, similar questions to those that you would pursue in the 5 traditional approaches. That is to say, you're going to be studying the relationship between the individual and society, but now through a different lens, thinking about how our mental states and processes, what you might think of as a biological account of the human, influences our social context, but also how our mental states and processes are in turn influenced by that social context. And so that'll be the focus of your Mind Core. Now, I said that there were 2 broad approaches, and so those are the quantitative data-focused approach and the more primary text-based approach. But there's one sequence that sort of bridges those 2 approaches, and that's the Global Society sequence, which will spend 1 quarter focusing on primary text-based work of the kind that you would do in one of the traditional cores, and then 2 quarters focused on quantitative analysis of demographic data. And there's a project component that students pursue at the end of that sequence. So that's, broadly speaking, the landscape of the Soc Core. You will find yourself, whether it's your first choice or not, in one of these sequences. And no matter what sequence you are in, you will find yourself, I think, very well served in meeting the 2 broad aims that I set out at the beginning of this conversation. And so I'd like to return to those aims now to give you a little more sense of what exactly I mean. So I'm sure some of you listen to a person who appears on the screen before you and tells you that we're going to teach you how to read, write, speak, and listen, and thinks, you admitted me to the University of Chicago. It's obvious that you already know that I can read and write and that I'm a pretty good communicator. You wouldn't have admitted me here otherwise. And that's true. You have developed a whole range of skills and strategies in high school to develop or to sort of communicate your ideas to others. But there wouldn't be any point in going to college if we wanted you to end in 4 years with the same skills that got you into the University of Chicago in the first place. Instead, we're going to ask you to do things that in fundamentally different ways from maybe how you have learned to do them so far. I always tell my students in my class that none of them have written the kind of essay that I want them to write before, because none of them have engaged in the scholarly life of a university before. Similarly, the way we approach reading is going to be pretty different to how many of you think about it. So I have here Plato's Republic, or one edition of Plato's Republic. It's a pretty small book, you know, it fits neatly on the shelf. In Classics of Social and Political Thought, we spend the first 4 weeks of the fall quarter reading Plato's Republic, going slowly through the text, using up 8 of our 18 classes to try and develop an account of what it is that Plato has achieved in this work, a work that 2,500 years later, scholars are still studying and still disagreeing about. So part of what we do is try and get you to move very slowly through the text, to understand that the point of the argument as laid out in the Republic and the style of argument, the strategy of argumentation, is not to think that each line of argument is a good line of argument. They're not. Some of them aren't good lines of argument. Some of them seem fruitless. They go nowhere. Others seem just silly, and students are often struck by how this, canonical text is filled with these arguments that seem just shaky in their foundations. But nevertheless, they form part of a book, and that book achieves an argumentative aim. And so part of what we try to do is try to understand, what is the utility of a bad line of argument in the course of a book like this? What exactly is it that Plato is trying to achieve by having the characters and the dialogue say things that strike us today, not only as unfamiliar, but as irrational? What is the value of having to think through somebody else's muddled conversation in order to come to an insight of enduring importance, as the Republic undoubtedly provides? Now, in order to do that, we have to read for the best Plato. We have to not think that Plato has made some fundamental error or some very easy mistake. None of which is to say that we have to agree with Plato. There's all sorts of things that Plato is going to say that you're going to find unseemly or unpleasant, that you're going to find, or that you're going to hope you wouldn't ever have to live with as ideas in your own social world. And yet, by reading for the best Plato, we can establish a foundation that we are able to disagree with in such a way that in the course of our disagreement, we say something new, not only about Plato, but about the shape of the social world as we want to see it. And so that takes time. It involves moving slowly through a text, getting caught up in its thickets, and nevertheless understanding that we can stand back and see a bigger picture. Similarly, when you approach writing for a class like mine, oftentimes you're going to spend a long time developing a set of ideas, or developing a framework for your paper, producing a first draft of that framework, redrafting that framework, because there are certain aspects of the argument that don't quite hang together. And one way to, that might sound like a strange approach to writing. It might seem like it's a wasted effort. But part of what we want you to see is that writing isn't something that we do once we're done thinking about a book like Plato's Republic. Writing is part of how we think through what we have experienced by reading this text. That is to say, writing is a modality of thinking. One of the experiences that lots of your professors will have had in their own professional lives is they'll have tried to write up an idea that they've had, and they'll find that in the writing, the idea falls apart. It simply doesn't hang together as neatly on the page as it did in their imagination. And so writing in that sense is an opportunity, an occasion for revising what we think about these texts that we're working with. The other thing is, writing really involves also obligations toward your reader. It is your responsibility as a writer to make it possible for your reader to follow what you're saying and to understand the insights that you have developed in the course of your thinking. And so one of the things we're going to stress is the development of a kind of clarity that goes alongside your intellectual boldness and your intellectual innovation, such that any reader not only readers who have familiarity with the Republic, but any reader of your paper should be able to follow along with the argument as you're developing it. And as I said earlier, another thing that we're going to want you to learn is this capacity to listen generously to one another, to hear the best version of what your peers have to say. Oftentimes, both in the political climate and in intellectual ones, we're too reactive in response to what we have heard, how we take other people to have spoken, what we imagine them to have said. And in our classrooms, we ask you to bracket that kind of judgment, not to change your mind or give up on your commitments, but to just step back and think, is this really the fairest rendering I can give for the argument that I've just heard? Might there not be a thought here that hasn't fully occurred to me yet? And might the best strategy not be not to disagree with what this person has said, but to ask questions, to interrogate their position, to develop and give them the opportunity to develop a richer understanding of one another. So these are all the main goals that the course will have in terms of your skill development. And I will say some of you are probably sitting there thinking, I don't really know why I need to learn to read or write in an age of AI when ChatGPT can read and write more effectively for me than I will be able to do in the time I have available to me. And I will just say, reasonable people can disagree about the merits of artificial intelligence as a writer and as a reader. I personally have a pretty deflationary view of it. But one of the things that we want you to be able to do is to tell the difference for yourself. We want you to know what it is to write and to think and to read closely so that you'll be able to exercise the kind of intellectual judgment necessary to know maybe when your AI is hallucinating or when your AI has sort of constructed an argument in a way that isn't persuasive or isn't effective to a reader. Now, relatedly, the second goal that we have is for you to develop an account of what it is to live in a society. And, again, this might seem like a redundant exercise for you. You already live in society. You've been doing it your whole life. Like, what else is there to learn about the society that shaped you? But one of the questions in Classics of Social and Political Thought we asked is, what does it mean to live a good and worthwhile human life in this society? And how is that different from how people in the past thought about what it was to live a good and worthwhile human life? What makes for the difference? Why did their hopes fall on such rough ground? And what are our hopes and what do they depend on? And in what ways can we learn, positively or negatively, from the experience of those whose ethics no longer animate us today? Similarly, some of the texts we're going to read are going to be disturbing to us. They're going to be unmooring to us. They're going to show us that there are aspects of our society that are less clear-cut and more troubling, indeed more upsetting than we might want to recognize. That there's power in the world that shapes our lives, that conditions the kinds of choices that we're able to make. Among others, the kind of choice of what major you're going to pursue in the course of your college career. These are the kinds of things that a SocCore will enable you to critically interrogate, making it possible for you to make maybe better decisions about what you want to do with your own life. And similarly, we might think about how different institutions and ideas condition how we think about ourselves, the ways in which our notions of race or gender or class don't only come to us autonomously, but emerge out of social interactions, out of institutions, and out of traditions of thinking, some of which we might want to trouble. We might want to think about whether or not the identities we have are good for us, whether or not they help us to flourish or live a good human life, or whether or not they produce impediments in our way. Learning to ask these kinds of questions and considering how to begin to answer them in systematic and sustained ways that you're able to communicate not only to those with whom you disagree, but most importantly, to those who don't share your perspective, is one of the greatest yields you can draw from your time in the SocCore, and I hope you take full advantage of it. Thank you.
Oh, Elise, you look muted.
Pardon me. Daragh, thank you very much for that inspiring preview of what students will experience here in the Social Core. As you know, the Social Core is dear to my heart as well. And I'm so excited to hear from our students in the next couple of years about that experience. So thank you. Thank you for joining us. And thank you also for so richly introducing the importance, I'll just say as shorthand, for writing to thinking, because it is now my pleasure to introduce Abby Reardon, who is the Executive Director of our writing program, and she's an Associate Senior Instructional Professor here in the college.
Hi, everyone. I'm delighted to be with you today, and thank you so much for the opportunity to talk with you a bit more about writing in the core, which, as Elise noted, we've heard a lot about already. Both Professor Grant and Professor Slauter highlighted the significance of writing in the core. Professor Spruill did as well. And so I'm pleased to be able to talk a little bit more about how writing as a core requirement specifically functions in relation to the education you'll be experiencing and engaging in throughout the college. Will, could we go to the next slide if possible? So, given that you've heard so much about writing in the core already, why do we have a core writing requirement if it is in fact the case, as you've heard, that writing is going to be central to the work that you do, not only in the humanities, social sciences, civilization studies sequences, but also in the science cores, in the math core? All of these different core experiences will involve writing in some way. And so why do we have a separate core requirement, given the prevalence of writing as an experience and task that you'll be undertaking throughout the core? So why do we have this requirement? What role does writing play in the core in general? And I'm looking forward to talking with you a little bit about how the writing requirement in the core is going to be changing starting next year as we really embrace this inflection point of what does it mean to write in an age of large language models and generative AI. So we'll be revising our approach to the writing requirement in the core, and that transition will be starting next year, and you'll have some options to consider when thinking about how you want to design your journey throughout the core, regarding how you approach the specific core writing requirement that you'll be completing. Before we talk about those two options explicitly, though, I do want to just highlight a few more facets of why we have a core writing requirement when there's going to be so much writing that you're doing, not only in your core sequences, but also in all likelihood in your majors and other programs of study. If you're doing it already, why have this extra requirement? We hope that in the core requirement for writing, you'll have more time to think about the process of writing as not only a means of communication, right, how we share ideas with one another, but as Daragh and Eric and others have noted, as an instrument of thought. How do we use the writing process to discover our best ideas, to communicate those ideas to others, but then crucially to revise those ideas as we learn new information, as we take in and respond to the ideas and arguments of others? How do we revise? What does revision mean as when writing in an academic context? How is it different than editing? What are the expectations for different genres of writing? If you're writing all the time, as I know you are, texting to family, maybe you're on TikTok and writing in a multimodal way, incorporating text with images. You've written quite a lot throughout your high school careers, and certainly wrote a number of different documents to get you into the University of Chicago. How do you know what is necessary in what writing context? When you write to your friends via text, that's quite different than how you will write an essay for your social science sequence. So how do you make decisions related to the purpose and function of a writing task? What does it mean to be a writer? who is writing with a reader in mind, with an awareness that we don't just write to express our innermost beliefs or thoughts, but to participate in conversations with others about ideas and problems that don't have easy solutions, that are complex and nuanced, and sometimes the work of writing, of developing an interpretive position in the context of an academic environment, that the work you'll be doing is really to explain that complexity, not to solve the problem, to help refine your understanding of an issue or question, knowing that when you're done with a given writing task, that doesn't mean the question is resolved or that your work thinking about the problem is over. You've reached a new threshold through that writing process, and you will inevitably continue pursuing and developing new goals and skills as a writer. So the core writing requirement pays particular attention to the processes of writing. And helps introduce you to specific habits of mind, a phrase you've heard quite a lot about in this webinar, that will be transportable for the variety of writing tasks and projects you pursue throughout your education in the college at the University of Chicago. So the hope is that once you've completed the core writing requirement, you'll have a very nuanced and rich toolbox of different types of writing and revision skills that you'll be able to draw from when undertaking writing tasks beyond your first year. So, as I noted, the core writing requirement it's changing. Eric had noted previously that 7 of the 8 humanities core sequences have something that we call writing seminars attached to them. And historically, the college has used a model for the writing core requirement in which the core requirement for writing was linked to the humanities core sequence. So what that has meant, and actually, Will, could we go 2 slides ahead if possible to the gray requirement, the gray track? What this has meant is that the writing requirement is linked up with the humanities sequence that you're taking. And students would be enrolled automatically in what we've called humanities writing seminars, the HUMA 19100, after they had selected the sequence that they're taking in the humanities. These writing seminars were, as I noted, linked to the writing that you're doing in the humanities classes. They were taken for a pass-fail grade. Students don't receive credit for this model of the writing core requirement because it is embedded in the humanities core sequence. And so this is the model that the college has used for the writing requirement for a number of decades for several reasons, and several really great reasons. The humanities is rooted in writing, and the thinking that you'll be doing in the humanities sequence has been and will continue to be essentially linked to writing as an instrument of thought. And so the college, we've had the writing requirement embedded in the humanities sequence for that reason. Practically speaking, this means that students who are taking humanities writing seminars, as I noted, are enrolled after the fact in these seminars. They work with a writing specialist who is an expert in writing instruction, and they meet 3 times per quarter in small groups. Small groups of students drawn from your humanities classes to focus on particular skills and challenges of writing that are linked to the writing assignments you're doing in your humanities classes. So this is a 2-quarter model of the writing core requirement. Students doing this model take the writing seminars in autumn and winter. And as I noted, they're enrolled in these seminars independently. So they're not part of your pre-registration process. This model, as I've indicated, is something that we've done in the college for some time, but we are moving away from for a number of reasons. But it is still an excellent way for students to come to understand some of the foundational skills that will be required to thrive in different intellectual communities and different writing-related tasks in the core. So most students next year, most of you will be on what we are calling the gray track. So the gray track is this humanities writing seminar model, where you will be added to writing seminars after you enroll in your humanities sequence and will be working directly with a writing specialist. The alternative track that we are moving toward is called the maroon track. And thank you, Will, for bringing us to this slide as well. So this is the second option that's available for the writing core requirement next academic year. And it is part of a broader transition that the college is making in how we think about teaching and learning with writing. As I saw a question in the Q&A, I think perhaps even the first one that came in, which asked, how are we modifying the curriculum to integrate AI? And there's no answer to that question in the Q&A as I saw it so far. But I mention that now because we are in a moment in which what it means to be a writer is fundamentally different, or has the potential to be fundamentally different than it has been in previous generations. And so the work that goes into developing as a writer and the attention that we need to pay to the process of learning to write with a reader in mind and writing as part of engaging in long-standing intellectual conversations, our approach is changing. To how we can best pursue and best attend to those goals and tasks. And so starting next year, the college is offering a standalone writing course. We're calling it Inquiry, Conversation, and Argument, which gives students more time to develop some foundational writing skills that will ultimately serve you well as you go into your writing tasks throughout the different sequences. So some material differences between these different options of the writing requirement. Whereas the gray track was a 2-quarter requirement taken in both autumn and winter, the maroon track option is a 1-quarter writing requirement. So students will enroll in a section of ICA, as we're calling Inquiry, Conversation, and Argument, in partnership with your academic advisor. And you'll take that class for a grade in one of the quarters of your first year here. Enrollment will happen during the typical pre-registration period. And as I noted, only a portion of incoming students will be on the maroon track next year as the college is transitioning toward this new model. So next year is our pilot year for the maroon track. And what we're very excited that students who enroll in Human Being and Citizen, one of the humanities sequences that Eric had described previously, one of our oldest sequences in the college actually, and a sequence that really richly combines literary and philosophical texts and is very interested in thinking about the ways that we contribute to new knowledge and develop new knowledge through writing. Human Being and Citizen students are going to be those students who are taking Inquiry, Conversation, Argument next year. This won't be particularly relevant for you all as incoming students for next year, but by the academic year of 2027-2028, all students will be on this maroon track. We'll be taking Inquiry, Conversation, and Argument. So a portion of your incoming class will have the really exciting opportunity to be part of the inaugural group of participating in this new form of thinking about writing and learning to write in an academic environment. The last thing I'll say about this class, I realize that we're coming up close on time, is that we're very excited that Inquiry, Conversation, and Argument, this maroon track option, will allow students to choose from a range of different interdisciplinary topics that will all have the same assignment structure, right? In all of these classes, you'll be learning to write thoughtful, incisive arguments. You'll be learning to give useful feedback to peers and to receive feedback from instructors and others. You'll be learning how to ask questions thoughtfully and to do some research to inform your writing process in a responsible way that really cultivates academic integrity. So all of these features will be consistent across different sections of inquiry, conversation, argument, but there will be different topics for the classes that you'll be able to pursue. And those topics are actually questions themselves. So next year, students taking ICA will be able to choose between classes like, what's the use of virtue? Are we more than our habits? What do businesses owe society? What is beauty for? How do we connect through machines, right? So a very wide array of different topics as questions, as a way of, and we'll be using those questions to kind of frame the different writing skills that we develop in these classes. So I'm very excited that that you'll have the option to consider which of these useful ways of approaching writing in the core will be best for you next year. And Will, if we could just go to the last slide quickly. Wonderful. And as I'm noting, right, in both the maroon and gray track, so both the independent inquiry, conversation, argument course that students enrolled in Human Being and Citizen will complete, and the gray track in which you will be enrolled in humanities linked writing seminars. In both of these different options, you're going to have dedicated time to think about and talk about and practice what it means to be a writer who is responsible, curious, engaged with texts and ideas of others. And as a final note, when you meet with your academic advisor for the pre-registration, before the pre-registration process, you'll have the opportunity to discuss with them what your preferences might be for either the maroon or the gray track for next year. So this is not a decision that you have to make now, but we're very excited to invite you into the world of the University of Chicago, and central to that will be writing in the core. So thank you for the opportunity to share this with you.
Thank you, Abby. Abigail Reardon is doing a great job with our restructuring of our writing, and I think you all will have a lot of rich new things to explore. So that's all very exciting. I wanted to, as we draw to a close, just emphasize that you will have an opportunity to explore this further. All of the things that we've discussed here as you go to the Canvas page that you will have received invitations to, where you can read more about the classes, learn a little bit more about prerequisites and requirements, and try to understand and prepare for this upcoming academic year. So with that in mind, I'll encourage you to go to Canvas, and I'll hand it back over to Steph if we have any time for questions.
Sure. Well, can you go to the last slide as well? We have just a couple quick updates we wanted to go over. There we are. Yes, for upcoming events. So we'll do a couple questions really quick since we're over time here, but just to highlight these upcoming events and also the core curriculum website on the bottom if you'd like to do another deep dive with more of the content you saw here today. So I think I got through most of the questions, and I left a few unanswered because I thought certainly our panelists would best kind of articulate a great response to these. Thank you for Abby for responding to the AI question quite a bit. So just lastly, a couple quick ones if we try to keep responses to 30 seconds. For the humanities, specifically we're asked, why are classes kept at 19 students? What are the reasons for that?
Is that directed to me, Steph?
Yes, that would be
sorry.
okay.
I don't think I'm appearing on the screen, but that's fine. As I said, this is an evolved practice, and this has not always been the case. The original, version of the introduction to the humanities, or general introduction to the humanities, was to put everyone in the same room. And to give everyone an exam at the end of the year. They would sit an exam, a comprehensive exam. Since the 1960s, we've had these different sequences or variants, And really, in the early 21st century, we dropped down to 19 as the cap, but it had been, we'd seen discussion sections of 30, of 25, of 19. I do think that's a good number, you know, that with an instructor, that's a good number for the kind of conversation, to be able to manage the conversation so that everyone can have a chance to participate. But you will find different, you know, different core classes will have different enrollment caps. Languages will often be capped at 15. Some arts core, you know, especially workshops might be 12 to 15. And, you know, I think there are variants between the various cores, but, you know, I think at one point was something that U.S. News and World Report did care quite a lot about. I don't think it's part of their algorithm anymore. You know, how many classes do you have that are lower than 20? But it's always been, or at least, you know, for the last few decades, been a real mark of pride for us to have, you know, to be able to manage you know, to subdivide the entire first year class into 110 or so groups, smaller groups, so that they can each have the chance to have those kind of intimate conversations.
Great, thank you, Eric. And a final last question that got a few upvotes from the students was, where can we find the book lists for these courses? So Daragh and/or Eric, would you like to weigh in on this inquiry?
Yeah, I would say, you know, there are some syllabi from past versions of the core. The core does not change with the same rapidity as some other courses. It tends to have some continuity, but please be careful and don't order the, you know, once you're in the course, you should be able to see an actual list of books for this year. So they are standardized across the sections. It's not dependent largely on whose section you're in, what you will be reading, but yeah, I think it's best to wait until you you know, are sure of what you've enrolled in. I think we'll try to update some of those syllabi to reflect the current book lists later in the summer.
I agree with that. Like, I think that the college website, the core website that was put up on the last slide, that's a place where you'll be able to find those sample syllabi, and it's broken out by sequence, so you can look there. I agree with Eric that while courses don't change dramatically from year to year, it's unlikely that what's written on the syllabi, the sample syllabi on those websites, will give you exact copies of the books or editions of books that you're going to be reading, but it'll give you a flavor for how each core approaches its own topics of interest.
If I could just jump in and say, I believe some of what students might see in the entering classes Canvas site goes back perhaps 3 or 4 years. Isn't that what we discussed, Eric, recently? But while the courses remain very much the same, students can also watch this year for some.
Yeah, I mean, as somebody who is interested in the history of the core, these are historical documents at this point.
And then if students out there have practical questions about the books they're going to need to purchase and are concerned about perhaps taking on some of those tasks, perhaps before they arrive, but certainly after they learn which courses they've secured, we have another website that when students meet with their advisors, they'll be introduced to, where you can actually look on the specific section and get the location and all of these practical details about the course. And within that website, you can click on a hot link that gives access to the syllabus and gives information about where to buy your books. These are things nobody needs to think about until well into September, but that information is readily available.
Thank you, Elise, and thank you to all of our panelists today. And thank you so much to everyone who attended. We really appreciate you spending time with us, and we look forward to meeting you in person this autumn.